Africa is witnessing a rise in its middle class as countries record high rates of growth. A recent World Bank report says African economies are growing faster than the rest of the world. While this news sounds uplifting, the reality on the ground is different. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that over 230 million people in sub-Saharan Africa are angry or undernourished. Millions of people have no access to basic health care or clean water, and many are asking, what exactly is the meaning of the so-called impressive growth of African economies? Now, from more perspective, I am joined by Faustine Wabwire, Foreign Assistant Policy Analyst at the Bread for the World Institute. The organization provides policy analysis on hunger and strategies to end it. Ms. Wabwire, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
So first, when you hear that African economies are growing faster than economies of other regions of the world, what exactly do you think about? What is growing?
I think that it's impressive to show that economies are picking up, and largely on the African continent. However, as you rightly say, there is a question that we ought to be looking at right now. Is this economic growth actually contributing to the reduction of hunger and poverty in the continent? And this gives a mixed picture.
Yes, and exactly when you think about the 55 African countries, when you're looking at that growth, how is it being measured? Is it country to country, or are we taking a global picture of the continent and then throwing out these numbers?
I mean, I think both of that has happened. Regional growth shows a much more improved picture of Africa compared to just 15 years ago. But at the same time, even national accounts reveal economic growth in individual countries ranging to up to maybe between 6 and 7% in a lot of African countries. Tanzania, for example, is one of those. What sectors are driving this economic growth, I think, is an issue that's worth exploring. When you look at it, a lot of growth is being driven by sectors that are predominantly in urban areas. They include communication, they include banking and financial services that are not so much directed to the millions of people who live in rural areas.
Serving the middle class. Those who live in the rural areas really mostly depend on agriculture and some kind of small-scale businesses. Now, how do you analyze how well the African countries are doing in terms of feeding those very vulnerable populations in the countryside who rely mostly on agriculture?
It's correct, because up to 80% of the people who are poor and hungry on the continent reside in rural areas and depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. Now, if growth is being registered at these high levels, but it's based in urban areas as opposed to rural areas, then it's no wonder that growth has not really translated into poverty reduction. I think for us to make this, turn this around, there has to be very intentional investments in the agriculture sector, where a lot of Africa's people live and depend for their livelihoods.
And so specifically, how do governments invest in this area? What must they really do beyond the rhetoric?
I think this is one thing that leaders on the continent have been wrestling with for a while. Since 2003, when they launched the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, was a good first step. But I think that as this year marks its 10th anniversary, there's really need for leaders of the continent to take some actionable steps, invest in infrastructure, including irrigation, invest in infrastructure that supports or prevents post-harvest losses. When you think about the grain losses on the continent, amount to up to $4 billion a year. That's far much higher than the continent receives in food aid, for example. So I think that targeting the investments in agriculture to returns, including investing in women and providing productive access to resources like land and credit, is critical.
And hopefully we'll continue our conversation from here next time. Faustine, thank you very much. Well, Faustine Wabwire is Foreign Assistant Policy Analyst at the Bread for the World Institute. Thank you for joining us. Now, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com.